Hey, folks, good evening, and thanks for joining me tonight on Phantoms and Monsters Radio. I welcome all new listeners, subscribers, and members to the channel, as well as first timers in the chat. So, the cryptid and supernatural worlds abound with malevolent creatures and energies. Some of the accounts that I've received from experiencers and witnesses detail situations that are simply beyond the pale, many times imprinting terrible memories for a lifetime. Now, when talking to these individuals, it's impossible not to feel their anguish, regardless of how remarkable or even mind numbing the details are. So, listen carefully to the stories and imagine being in the shoes of these people that in what they felt during their encounters, and think about how you would react and what you may have done. So, that being said, let's go ahead and let's get started.
We live in a reality of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it.
So, before I go any further, I want to mention that this channel is made possible by you clicking on the subscribe and like buttons and by you sharing our programming. Super chat and super thanks donations are appreciated. And you can click the dollar icon located below in the chat box. The Buy Me a Coffee link is also shown below. So, thanks for your consideration. Your comments are always welcome. Tell me which accounts you find interesting in the presentation or suggestions for upcoming shows. Again, I want to thank our chat moderators, Bernadette, Marla, Thomas, and Mike, and also Kevin, and for their commitment to me and the channel. Now, if you're in the chat and have a question, please use all caps. I'll try to get to each one after the presentation. So, in this first account, two southern Georgia hunters encountered two remarkable upright cryptids at the same location. Now, the hunters then watched the cryptid pair fight as one actually kills the other. So he stated, this was sent to me from another investigator who took the testimony. He said that two men by the name of Art and Charlie were out hunting on private property in southern Georgia, and they observed something come out from the tall grass. It was across a small pond, but they could see it clearly. It brought its head up out of the grass and looked around. Now, at that point, it stood up on its hind legs. It was around 6.5 feet tall with a blocky or alligator like head. It had large claws, a big tail, and rounded snout, though it was not as typical as an alligator's. It walked up to the pond and then jumped in. It began to swim in their direction, but stopped in the middle to stare at them. The two experienced hunters thought about shooting it, but decided against it. Now, at that point, off to the right, about 50 yards away, they saw coming out of the tree line a 7 foot tall dog like creature walking on its hind legs as well. Now, one of the men looked at it through his scope and noted that it looked like what he stated, a dang werewolf. It appeared to be watching the reptile creature intently, taking no notice of the hunters. It walked up to the water, crouched down, and then began drinking as a human would, using its paws. It then peered over at the hunters. As this happened, the reptile creature vanished under the water. It suddenly popped up about 12 feet away from the bank, almost in front of the wolf like creature. At that point, the wolf creature backed away. Eventually, the reptile creature drifted back out into the water, and the dog like creature returned to drinking water. A few moments later, as the dog creature walked along the shore, the reptilian creature, which had been moving around the pond, launched an all out attack on the dog creature springing out of the water. The two fought. The reptilian managed to drag the dog thing under the water. Now, the two creatures, both bloodied, suddenly appeared on the side of the pond as the hunters moved off. The dog like creature climbed on top of the alligator and pulled its top and bottom jaw in opposite directions. There was a distinct pop, and the alligator creature suddenly stopped struggling. Now, afterward, the dog like creature lay on the ground, chest breathing heavily. One of the hunters decided that he was going to shoot it, but the other talked him out of it. They promptly left the area. Now, apparently, the property owner was aware of the alligator creature. He claims that they had started to see it around their properties 3 years earlier. So, in this next account, the witness states to me, "Hello, sir. I recently started reading your site after looking for information on Bigfoot in South Dakota. You asked for real life encounters? Well, my family had a scary confrontation in 1992 while RVing. We camped near Wind Cave National Park several times while I was a boy, but stopped going in that part of South Dakota after our experience with something unknown. We normally camped in the early summer, but for whatever reason, my father decided we'd go a few weeks before I went back to school. Now, we always enjoyed going to Wind Cave and would spend a full day there. We then spend the rest of the week around the RV campground. Now, this particular year, we were camped further away from Wind Cave in the vicinity of Hill City, not far from Mount Rushmore. Now, the area was surrounded by thick pine forest and very rugged. It was a Saturday night and very calm around our campsite. Many people had left during the day, so there were a few kids running around. Now, around 10:30 p.m., I decided to go to bed. I was bored, and my parents were entertaining another couple. I lay down and turned the radio on while I drifted to sleep. Now, the only thing I remember next is my mother making lots of noise while inside the RV. I sat up and watched my father looking for something in the storage bin. The next thing I noticed was that he was holding his pistol. I was wide awake now, wondering what was going on. I started to ask, but was quickly told to be quiet by both. They were standing by the door when suddenly something slammed its back in the back of the into the back of the RV. I thought someone had hit us with a vehicle. The window in the back was smashed and the curtain was on the floor. Now I moved towards my parents when again something slammed into the back of the RV. At the same time, a deep rumbling sound came from the same direction. I never thought my mother could scream so loud. My father raised the pistol and fired through the window opening. We waited quietly for something to happen. Whatever it was must have run off. Now, by that time, someone was yelling from outside, wanting to know what was going on. I think it was someone from the campground. Now, my father went outside to talk to whoever it was. My mother was very scared and was visibly shaking. She just grabbed me and squeezed me tight. Now, my father came back into the RV and said that we're leaving. He grabbed whatever gear was outside, threw it in the RV, and we were off. Now, none of us talked much as we drove home, which was about a 4-hour drive. Now, a few days later, my mother told me what happened that night. My parents were just about ready to go to bed. She said it was about 11:45 p.m. and she was cleaning up outside when she noticed something large on two legs run from behind the RV into the forest. My father told her that was probably a bear. Then he saw it duck out and then back into the woods. There wasn't much light other than from a lantern in the back window from inside the RV. He told her that that was no bear. By that time, they were in the RV and heard deep guttural grunts coming from the creature. My father then slowly opened the door. It was standing no more than 10 feet away, looking directly at him. He quickly slammed the door shut and went looking for the pistol. Now, my father has never said much about whatever it was, but from his later description, I believe he confronted a Bigfoot. He described it as covered head to toe with thick dark hair, with a wide nose and piercing yellow eyes that glowed in the light. He estimated the height over 6 foot and had a weight over 400 pounds with huge arms and legs. That basically all he ever said. He refuses to talk to anyone else about it. Now, we continued camping over the years, but we never went back to that area. I was looking for Bigfoot reports for South Dakota, and especially around this Mount Rushmore area. Now, next account, a man and his father were driving across the United States in an RV. In Utah, when the man entered the convenience store, he encountered a young black eyed man. He believed it was a malevolent entity. This is what he told me. In 2003, I was taking a trip across the country with my father from the East Coast to the West Coast. We camped out for a couple days in federal land in Utah and needed gas. It was an extremely desolate area, but we passed a little crossroads. There was a convenience store built on the side of a rock wall. Now, when I walked in, I remember there was an old man behind the counter and a younger looking man in one of the aisles. No flags went off, just the normal setting. Now, I was paying for the gas at the counter, and the younger man came up from behind me to stand in line. He kind of passed the boundary of my comfort zone, so I casually inched forward a bit. He did it again. So I gave him sort of a side glance, a quick glance to the eyes. Looking back at me were watery, completely jet black eyes. I only glanced at them for a split second, but that was enough to start to process what I had seen. The hair on the back of my neck went up immediately. It freaked me out, but I left calmly. I got in the passenger side of the RV. My father had finished pumping gas and we left. I didn't exactly have any fear, more just something I couldn't process from the norm. 2 days later, we made it to the West Coast near San Francisco and headed north on the Pacific Coast Highway. We made it to a campground in a small coastal town of Eureka, California, to camp and stay the night. Now, the town had a movie theater that we could walk to from the camp, so we called a show and headed back for the night. I climbed up into the loft and fell asleep. About an hour later, I woke up with a fever of 104 and was very weak. I woke my father and he drove the RV to the hospital in town. In about 15 minutes, we were pulling into the parking lot. After waiting for a couple of minutes before going in, the fever broke. My temperature dropped back to normal, but I felt wore out and drained from head to toe. I remained drained for a couple of days, but no fever. Now, we stopped in a walk in clinic in Eugene, Oregon to have blood work done. Nothing abnormal was found. I don't know if the sickness had any connection to the young black eyed man I glanced at, but it always kind of haunted the back of my mind. Now, my father was aware of my description of the young man, and there were and was there firsthand to see the strange illness. We do talk about it, and that it being very strange 20 years after the fact. Now, I received an account from about a hairy man attacking a native man on Blackfoot Reservation in western Montana, and it was recounted by a resident. The horrible incident was told to him by his father. He states, I live in western Montana and live on a reservation known as Blackfoot Nation. My father is a tribal member, my mother is not, and I'm therefore a white descendant and have grown up experiencing both sides of the culture. Both whites and Indians have stories that they rarely tell. When my father was born, he was conscious. That is something you would never tell a stranger, but I'm telling you what he told me. He remembers being in the waiting room before birth and surrounded by thousands of babies. Some were deformed, some were sickly. There were black, Asian, and other races, and one of them was covered in hair. I can't explain it this part better than what he could, but basically, he saw the waiting room for souls. He was one of the few who were led through. I'm only sharing this detail because as a child, I had dreams about the hearing man and his family before I was ever exposed to the concept of Bigfoot. Now, these dreams are frightening and unexplained and only made sense years later when my father related them to me. Now, in my opinion, the hairy man is somehow related to this area in a big way. My ancestors, having been first to settle in this area, had had extensive experience with the hairy man. Sasquatch may be part of my genetic memory, as well as my father's and grandfather's. My father was born with the precognition of the hairy man. Now, as a small boy, I was playing in the living room with many brothers when one of them burst through the door screaming and crying for my grandmother to come out and make him go away. This was the first time the hairy man had appeared in my father's life. My uncle, also a child at the time, had seen the Sasquatch in his small garden, but out back, which is next to the small creek. The Sasquatch was stealing vegetables and ran off after being seen. Now nobody spoke of this event afterward. Sasquatch was taken for granted back then. Now, as the years went by, my father reached his early 20s, and stories had been popping up around the reservation about a wild man breaking into houses and scaring children at night. The wild man was said to be very large and smelly. One family started to be visited by a hairy man almost every night. They would come home and see the door left open, their food taken, and the animals cowering under the table. This routine was so similar that they treated it as common occurrence, like the family ghost, as my father put it. Everyone started to lock their doors at night. Dogs were acting cowardly for no apparent reason. The wild man was having his way. He was getting bold. He started to break into houses during the middle of the day. Children would see him. The tribal police were called and meetings were held. The town was becoming more and more shaken by the presence of this unknown intruder. This is when something incredible happened to the family who was favored by the hairy man. One night, while standing on the porch, the father was yanked off his feet in full view of the entire family. They screamed and huddled together and cried. Well, whatever it was, fault with my father on the fault with the symptomatic for the kid. They are all now grown up like myself, and I wonder to this day how much it have actually affected their lives. The father was gone for days. Whatever it was that had taken him had carried him off in the night after the struggle on the porch. There was blood on the grass, and the family grabbed neighbors and other men in the community to help recover the father. The men got together and followed the signs and trails left by whatever this was. There were drops of blood and signs of something very large passing through. They followed this trail all the way to the very creek where my uncle had spotted the Sasquatch when he was a boy. They followed the creek all night. And when the men returned the next day, they didn't speak a word. A whole group of grown men, and not one of them was willing to speak about what happened. They had, however, found the father and recovered him. He was beaten black and blue over his entire body. He had broken arms and legs. The father was in shock and incoherent. He couldn't say a word. Now, one of my uncles had gone to see the man and his family in the hospital. There was a fair amount of goodwill being shown to the family that went through this horrible experience. Nobody knew what had happened, only that the father was close to death and the family was very shaken up. Now, my uncle stopped by to pay his respects and saw for himself the father lying in the hospital. His eyes were bulging wide. He was trembling constantly. This man had been beaten badly. He died that night, and to this day, nobody knows what grabbed him or what had happened to him. The men who went on the recovery mission to save him have kept their stories to themselves. Only a select circle, including my father, remembers these incidents. All that I was told was that those men found what it was what took the father. They found the hearing man, and they killed it with high power rifles and buried the body. The men who did this feel incredibly guilty. The older generation told us to avoid the Sasquatch and leave them alone because they are human beings. They're not animals and they are not magic, but they can most certainly be monsters. And this is one story that corroborates that. Now, the following account was forwarded to me several years ago, and since then I've talked to the writer to ease the guilt and worry that she still retains. She tells me, "Hello, sir. Your email was forwarded to me by a relative who thought you and your colleagues would help answer some questions regarding an incident I witnessed a few years ago. You have my permission to use the story, but I do ask that you leave my name out. Since I no longer live in the area where this occurred, you may use those details. But I would ask you to call me first." And I did call and I got her permission to use certain parts of her account. Now, it was the summer of 2004. At the time, I was selling real estate in Warren County, Virginia, but mostly in front rural Virginia area. The vicinity is known more for the Shenandoah Valley as well as its history during the American Civil War. It seems that most of the older property has a story behind it and usually tied to the Civil War. Now, I moved there in 2000, not long after I graduated from college. Real estate sales were not my first choice for a career, but I was doing well, so I decided to see how far it would go. In March 2004, a house with many acres of farm property was listed for sale. The former resident had recently passed away and the family was selling it. Now, from what I gather, none of the relatives wanted to take over the property. It was decided that it would be sold as soon as possible. Now, on the first day I toured the old place, it was obvious that the previous owner took very good care of it. It was quite nice house with a barn, smokehouse, large greenhouse. A nephew of the former owner accompanied me during the inspection. Now, he assured me that there would be no attempts by any family member to impede a sale and that everything in the house was to be sold as is. All furniture, appliances, tools, etc., were to be included in the sale. Now, I explained to him that they would most likely realize more profit if the items were removed for sale in an auction, but he insisted they must be sold as is and that the buyer would be responsible for the contents. I thought this was quite odd, but I promised that I would do as the sellers wanted. Now, to my surprise, the property was listed for only 3 weeks. The overall housing market was starting to get very tight, and large properties were difficult to sell. But in fact, I made the sale to a couple from Washington D.C. who were at the second party that showed interest. Who were the second party that showed interest? They made a counteroffer, which was quickly accepted by the sellers. Everything went quite smoothly through the day of the settlement, but a bit strange. The nephew and his sister were representing the sellers. Their demeanor was very distant and cold during the entire procedure. At one point, the buyers asked the nephew if there was any property in the house that he would like to keep. The nephew gave him a glaring look and told them that he didn't care if they burned it all. Several weeks later, the new owner invited me for dinner to their new home. They were quite proud and wanted to tell me about the history of the place. It was once owned by a former British officer who had defected and fought with the colonists during the Revolutionary War. Now, later it became a working farm and remained so until the 1950s when it was purchased by a Baptist preacher and his wife. Now, the couple was considered quite eccentric, and the preacher never had a large congregation. The new owners were told by an attorney who lived nearby that the preacher held worship services in the barn because there was never a church. There were many rumors of strange rituals being performed during those services. Now, it was a very enjoyable evening, and we agreed to get together again. I really liked this couple. They were very intelligent and quite polite. The husband worked for the federal government, and the wife was a pharmaceutical representative. They had grown tired of the urban lifestyle in Washington, D.C., and wanted a home where they could relax. One thing I did notice was that much of the furniture and appliances left in the house remained and were being used by the new owners. Now, unfortunately, the July 4th weekend, the couple invited me to join their cookout. My boyfriend was staying with me for a week, so he decided to come along. I hadn't seen the couple in over a month and was very interested to know how their life in the new home was going. When we arrived, I instantly knew something was wrong. We started walking towards the back of the house and noticed that no one other than the couple were there. I asked if we were the first to arrive and was told that none of their friends accepted the invitation. We sat down in the lawn chairs and started to talk. They both looked worried, though I didn't understand what was going on. I'm a very direct person, so I asked if there was something wrong. The wife looked at me and explained that none of their friends would come to the house anymore and that they had all these bad experiences when visiting. She started to get more specific and said that they thought the property was haunted. I tried not to laugh, but the smile quickly came to my face. I looked back at both. They were deadly serious and not smiling. They said that something tried to push people down the stairs and that a bad odor would permeate the living room for a few minutes and fade away. They also heard screaming sounds outside at night and thought they may have been coming from the barn. As well, they were both having dreams about dead bodies buried in the greenhouse and the barn. I had never experienced anything paranormal while on the property, so I just simply dismissed it. The day went by without an incident, and in fact, it was quite enjoyable. It was starting to get late, and I needed to get up early the next morning, so we thanked them for the hospitality and drove home. I really didn't think much about what I was told and quickly went to sleep that night. So the next morning, I woke up early and got myself together because I had several homes scheduled to show that day. I needed to first stop by the office so I could pick up the newest listings. Now, when I arrived at the office, I noticed a police car in the parking lot. I walked into the office and was immediately approached by the office manager and told that the authorities wanted to talk to me. I introduced myself to the police officers and asked what was going on. One of them handed me a photograph of the couple. They were lying on the ground, side by side, obviously dead. They were both very pale, like all the blood had been drained. I acknowledged that I sold them the property and that we had socialized the previous day. He explained that their bodies had been found by a police officer the previous night after a 911 call was placed for disturbance, and that they were found lying in the barn as seen in the photo. The only information I could provide was that what they told me and that they thought the property was haunted. Now, the next day, I was told that they both died from natural causes and that there would be no further investigation. That's all I was told, and that's all I would ever find out. Now, I asked the physician if it was possible that two people could be scared to death at the same time. He, the look he shot back at me was of utter bewilderment, which was followed by laughter. He said that it was practically impossible to scare a person to death, let alone two people at the same time. Now, since that incident, I moved to the West Coast and no longer sell real estate. I know their deaths will haunt me for the rest of my life. I wouldn't feel so bad if I hadn't dismissed what they said so quickly and so out of hand. I feel that something on that property frightened them so badly that it resulted in their deaths. Now, I had an associate in the area check out the circumstances described in the story, and now I told the writer or the witness that I was going to do that. She agreed just so her name was left out of the post. Now, there was a death of a couple in the area as the time described. And since there was no investigation and the deaths were determined to be of natural causes, it's the only information that was ever available. And that's what was put on the death certificate. So what happened, we really don't know. Now, a Tennessee man was physically and mentally attacked by a shadow being at Frozen Head State Park. It drained him so badly that he feared that he was going to die before he could escape. So this is what he wrote to me. I encountered a shadow being in the Judge Branch campsite in Frozen Head State Park of Tennessee. It was summer 2017. I was camping alone, and in the broad daylight, it seemed just jump right up in front of me as I was shaking out of my small tent. It was 6 foot tall and completely black. It was like looking into a hole rather than just looking black in color. It was there for a few seconds. That was enough for me to stumble back and reach for my bear spray. It disappeared in seconds. Then I was literally so stunned that it took me time to figure out what I had seen. It seemed to drain me emotionally, intellectually, and physically. I was rendered stupid for a good hour. I was unable to think clearly or in any way mentally process the black humanoid figure that I had seen. I survived a terrible case of Lyme disease 20 years prior. Somehow, I believe that this experience saved me. I had learned to push through exhaustion and confusion back then. So I dimly resolved what I was leaving while I could. That I dimly resolved that I was relieving while I could. Still, it took me 3 tries to pack my gear. I would force things into my backpack and drop to the ground drained of life. Again and again, I stood up and did the impossible. Finally, with my pack on and darkness approaching, I literally had to crawl up the slight incline to the trail that would lead me back to my car. With the clear sense that I was being followed, I stumbled for almost 2 miles down the trail. Just as I saw the parking lot 100 yards ahead, something hit my backpack so hard that I nearly fell. I whirled around and there was nothing there. I felt like I was being drained of strength. Now I'm 6'2", fit, and had solid muscle. Still, this was a grim battle for my life just walking. I could tell that very soon, even walking was going to be impossible. Fear, whatever these things are, they take up your strength and they trigger fear like no bear or wolf encounter ever could. It uses every human weakness against you. I kept going on with just a desire to survive. Somehow I knew that if I stopped and the sun set, I would be dead. This sounds crazy, but I could sense that this thing would get stronger at nightfall. I crossed a short bridge over a stream. Crossing the stream seemed to give me a sense of crossing a border. A border. I felt like it was not able to pursue me any further. It was just a feeling. 50 yards later, I was in my car, again being beyond exhaustion. It took everything I had to throw my pack into the car and get in. It took 2 minutes to catch my breath and start the car. Drained as I was, I managed to get fast food on the way home so I could barely find the strength to sit up straight in the driver's seat. I couldn't explain it to my wife that evening, so I didn't try to until later. I stumbled into the house and dropped on the couch. I'm alive because I fought for my life with everything I had. I have researched this since, and I believe that this was a missing 411 experience. It fit the profile: strong, experienced outdoorsman, and mentally capable. Such people are found dead in crazy distances from where they're last seen, if they are found at all. These people all end up dead either way. I now understand what happened to these people. It's hard to explain how something can drain the life away while being insubstantial or maybe outside of your perceived reality, but it can happen. I survived. I'm not aware of another adult 411 case that did. No one can really believe me, but I know how close I came to being written off as another open and unsolved 411 case. So go ahead and try it. Reserve the Judge Branch campsite at Tennessee Frozen Head State Park. Stay the night. I researched the site online and found that hikers years before found the same campsite deserted. Expensive equipment was left strewn around the site, and there was a trail of camping gear littered down the trail. It looks like I was not the first person to have to run from that campsite. I hope that they made it out as I did. Again, I don't know of anyone else surviving a 411 short of all one or two kids that were too young to explain how they covered crazy distances from where they were lost. I may be the only one who can explain this from an adult's perspective. Now, I have the records to prove that I was there. I can return a month later with friends. Excuse me, I even returned a month later with friends. I had to confront this force that almost destroyed me. It was a day trip and nothing happened. I will say that I found melted candles on a few of the huge granite boulders there. It seemed to be evidence of Wiccan activity. That's only a guess. Using white Using candles while camping is both dangerous and inefficient. It did make me wonder if someone was trying odd rituals there, knowing that something was there. I know that it's there and someday I will return and settle accounts. I don't like to run from a fight. Kind of an odd story. But I've heard similar as far as shadow beings. Now, this next account the witness states this occurred approximately 3 years ago, and it still haunts me regularly to this day. I thought perhaps I was alone in the encounter, but recently saw a story while surfing the web and thought that this may have been a similar experience. Now, my encounter happened in late June in the middle of the night, shortly after I had fallen asleep. I had spent the day guarding earlier and had sprayed around the house to control mosquitoes that day, which I thought might have caused me to hallucinate this experience. I also lived alone at the time. Anyway, I went to bed and at some point was woken up by the sound of children giggling and playing outside my house in the middle of the night. Now, I lived in a 1 story rancher and could hear them playing and tapping on the windows in the front of the house. I peeked out the blinds and could see these kids, and they appeared to be 3 Asian kids under the age of 10. Now, I don't remember what the boy was wearing, but the girls were in black dresses like they had come from some event. They had ear-length jet black hair with bangs. I was in my pajamas, so I decided to ignore them and pretend that they weren't there, hoping that they would realize that they were at the wrong place and just go away. Then they started knocking on the door persistently. I figured they must have seen me and were not going to go away, so I answered the door. 3 kids were there and an adult facing away on the sidewalk. They insisted that they lived at my house and that they needed to come in. I told them that they had the wrong house. Then they asked if I knew some person and said that they were coming to meet him and again insisted that they'd come in. Again, I replied that they must be confused, that it was just me there and I didn't know them and they didn't belong in my house. There are many Asian families in my neighborhood, so I thought they might be arriving in town late to visit someone and have just gotten the wrong address. I then shut the door. Again, there was a knock. I opened it, and this time it was the adult standing in front of the kids. There were also a few additional family members now gathered on the sidewalk of my house. He looked at me like to be a Chinese or Japanese older man with a long mustache, a goatee, and wore sunglasses at night and a black suit. Again, he said that they lived there and were meeting someone else and insisted that I let them in because they had traveled a long way. Now, at this point, something clicked in my brain and I stared back at the man and very firmly told him I knew who he was and that he did not belong there and went to shut the door. At the instant that I said this, the man showed his true form, which was that of some sort of demon or beast. He screamed or roared in my face, grabbed me by the neck, and pinned me up against the wall, enough to knock the wind out of me. Now, I wish I could give a better description of what it looked like, but the second I saw it change, I closed my eyes and began to pray as hard as I could and focus only on praying and blocking this thing that had pinned me against the wall. It was the only thing I could do because I was sure he was going to kill me at that moment. Not sure what happened next, but I woke up in the morning in my bed. However, my neck was stiff like I had whiplash for days and my front door was ajar. Now, every single night after this incident, I couldn't go to bed without putting a chair with a 20-pound weight on it in front of the door. I also had to push a recliner in front of the patio door. Luckily, I moved from that place earlier this year. I have not had an encounter since this experience. This vivid experience was a one time event. Before this, I had classic reoccurring sleep paralysis with feelings of evil spirits being in the room and pressing on my chest, but never anything like that was at my door. After this encounter, I thought I hadn't had nightmare sleep paralysis like I had in the past. I have a feeling that maybe they had been scoping me out before actually visiting and making a move, but were confronted and rejected, so they haven't come back. So, in this next account, a former ranger at Sequoia National Park describes his encounter with a Bigfoot. His Jeep was attacked and damaged. He was later terminated by his supervisor for telling the truth. So he tells me, "Hi, my name is Arthur and I'm a Californian. And I used to work as a ranger at Sequoia National Park from 1994 to 1997. Now, before I start, I just want to say that I'm very emotional as I write this because the memories are extremely traumatic. It happened in 1997 in my last work year as a ranger. It was also this event that got me fired. I was patrolling an area that was not very frequented by visitors because of the density of the bushes and because it was an easy area to get lost. I had received a report of loud sounds coming from there, sounds that were scaring the visitors, making them think there was a bear on the loose or something. It was noon, and I was driving around the area with the Jeep and a tranquilizer rifle just in case something was out there. I spent 1 hour driving around and stopped the Jeep, exited it, and was standing by the open door. I was about to pick up my walkie talkie and report the situation to one of the other rangers that were patrolling the other side when I heard something on my left, a loud growl. I looked and there were a big red brown thing with wide shoulders, long arms, huge human like hands looking at me. Now, this part really breaks me every time I remember it because I got paralyzed in fear, and not because this thing was bigger than a grizzly bear and glaring at me with a face that I can only describe as a hungry predator. I felt like ambushed prey. I stood there and this thing charged me with full force, and I entered the Jeep almost instantly. The creature crashed into the Jeep, breaking the door's window, and the thing grunted in pain. I turned the Jeep on and accelerated beyond the speed limit of the park. I looked behind for a second, and this monster was running after the Jeep on all fours like a chimp. I panicked even more, and I increased the speed, and some curves later, I finally lost it. I arrived at the ranger station. There was nobody there. I remember being so panicked that I locked myself inside the bathroom, and I'm certain that I fainted because I remember that everything went black. When I woke up, it was 9 p.m., and the other rangers were looking for me. My boss confronted me with the Jeep having one of the sides damaged with the broken window, and when I told him that a big animal attacked me, he got angry and called me a liar who sleeps on the job and accused me of crashing the Jeep into a tree and making stories up not to get in trouble. And then he fired me. I did years and years of therapy and it didn't work. The memories still haunt me, and I still have nightmares and sudden panic attacks. I know the things that tried to snatch me was a Bigfoot, not a bear. Bears don't have human faces, human hands, and wide shoulders, and they don't have freakishly long limbs. I lived with these memories for more than 20 years, and this is the first time telling this story ever since. Thank you for reading. Now, in this last account, here's another weird one. Um, and I'll just go into the account itself. The witness uh, had told this to an investigator, and the investigator forwarded to me recently, actually. He tells me that the witness was hiking in the woods around Kirkland, Washington. He soon came upon a creature climbing a tree. Initially, he thought it was a giant white lizard. As he examined it, he made out that it was a translucent creature with a tail. Its body almost looked like an exoskeleton with stubby little legs or appendages. It turned its head backward and was looking directly at him. making a snapping sound with its mouth. Its face had jagged bumps on the top and bottom, and the witness couldn't tell where the teeth were or if the bumps were teeth. Now, suddenly, he began to hear a whooping noise. Just then, a creature came crashing through the brush. The white creature turned its head to listen and then began to scale further up the tree. A large blackish brown bipedal creature suddenly came around the tree and grabbed it. The white creature whipped its tail, hitting its arm. Seemingly surprised, the white creature screeched out, turned, and leaped onto the Sasquatch. Despite it being 4 times its size, the white creature fought wildly, crawling all over it and burned it with some type of substance that the witness assumed was a type of venom, which causes the Sasquatch to screech in pain. Smoke was visible anytime the white creature leaned in to bite. After some time, the Sasquatch grabbed the white creature by the head and literally pulled it off. The white creature flipped forward and then its head spun about 360 degrees around. It bit the Sasquatch's arm. The Sasquatch threw it against the tree and punched it, causing it to splat like a fried egg. The white creature seemed to do this on purpose, elongating itself around the tree to absorb the blow. Now, the white creature then hopped to another tree, and the Sasquatch followed, attempting to hit it with a stick. Eventually, the white thing fell out of the tree and ran into the woods. The Sasquatch followed it. The witness had no idea why, but the Sasquatch appeared to want to kill the white creature. So that's the last account. And I realize that last one was kind of weird, but the investigator swears that's what he was told. So who knows? So if you got any questions, I'll take them now. Race Van Mike. So if there is a dog man, what about a dog woman? Well, I just did a dog woman account. I don't, maybe you weren't here that night, Mike, but I did get a dog woman account. So it is listed on the blog, and it's in one of the previous episodes. So you might want to go back and listen to it. Any other questions? Ann Boyle, what kind of briefs do dogmen have? I don't know what you're talking about. I think I'll skip on that one. Another question? The Gongordian Slayer, so it can't die. So what can't die? Are you talking about a specific creature? I guess you're talking about the last one. I don't know. I have no idea. What's the venom creature? I have no idea what that was. I don't know. It kind of, the description seemed to be like an albino like lizard that had some decent size to it, but the fact that it fought with the Sasquatch and lived to tell the tale, I guess. I don't know what it was. That's a crazy story. Like I said, it was sent to me by another investigator who swears that what he got, he had talked to the victim. So I don't know what that was. But every once in a while, we get some really strange ones. So that kind of fits the bill right there. Anything else? Some type of lizard. Yep, that's what it was, apparently. Okay. That's all the questions. Okay. Thank you, Christina. I appreciate it. And folks, I want to thank each and all of you for watching and chatting. And if you donate, it's truly appreciated. Your support's what makes all this possible. So please like, subscribe, and share. If you have a sighting or encounter report that you'd like to be considered for the show or for the blog, feel free to contact me at my email, at Lon Strickler, phantomsandmonsters.com. So until we meet again next Friday, you all have a great weekend, have a great week, and we will see you then. Take care.